separate the real from the fake. See, we got to get back to love. If we get back to love, then that's when we're going to get back to us.
It seems like it's never enough. And what do you say?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another installment of People Empowerment, where we would strive to change the conditions of our community. Today we have a very special guest, but before I get into the guest, I would like to go over a few things as far as current events. As you well know, the elections are coming up, and I want you out there to understand it is very important for you to vote. Now, you may believe it is just as simple as you voted in 2008, you voted in 2010, and you can just go out and vote. But some things have changed here in Buffalo called redistricting. The Redistricting Act has taken certain people away from their polling places, and some people do not realize it. Now, recently in the city of Buffalo, there was a big debacle with Betty Jean Grant running for her district to be a senator. And because of the Redistricting Act, there were hundreds of votes for her thrown out. Now, I want you to understand, it doesn't matter whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent. You must be able to go to the right voting place, and you must be able to vote. Now, this is very important. If you have moved recently and you haven't re-registered to vote, then your vote will not count. So you must go and re-register. That's very important for all you people out there who have moved, who didn't vote in the primary and think that you can just go and vote in a general election. You are wrong unless you go and you reapply and you re-register. If you moved, if you've changed your last name, if you've gotten married, all these things, if anything has changed since you last voted, then you need to re-register. And it's very important that you know that the last date for a mail-in registration is October the 12th. That's coming up very soon, about 8 days. So you have to get that in immediately. And if you're going to go in and hand the paperwork in yourself to re-register, then you need to be down at 134 West Eagle by the 17th, which is the last day. Now, if you don't go and do this, you're not going to be able to vote, and your vote is not going to count, especially if through the Redistricting Act, you're not in the right district. So it's very important. If you want your voice to be heard, if you want to make a statement from your vote, then make sure that you are registered. Call down to the Board of Elections and find out if you are eligible to vote, and if not, where you should go and what you should do. Now, it's very important. Remember, I'll let you know. Now, today's guest is Mike Madigan. He's running for Congress, and he has quite a bit to say. Now, so with no further ado, Mike, how you doing, Mike?
Very good, Nate. Thank you.
Nice to have you here on the show.
Appreciate it.
Okay, here at People Empowerment.
Great.
Now, I would like for you to tell the people a little bit about yourself before we get started. Okay.
I've lived in Western New York all my life. I've been living in Grand Island now for 25 years. I'm a manufacturing manager at that site right now. It's a biopharmaceutical company. We work with a lot of other biopharmaceutical companies to try and reduce their production costs. Mm-hmm. And right now, so really in terms of what I'm running for or why I've entered this race, if it's okay to proceed into that.
Sure.
So some of the things that really drive me for this race are, when I see what's happening in this district, I see a really poor leadership in terms of prioritization. This district has a lot of serious issues. It's not the waterfront. Waterfront's an interesting thing. We can do some things concurrently there. There's some real crises that are occurring in this district right now. We have the civil rights issue of our time right now in terms of our public education system. We graduate fewer than 20% of our African male population right now. Fewer than 20%. That's a serious situation. That is the civil rights issue of our time. As a result, employment rate, well above. We're talking about 8% as being a concern. We're above 20% for African American males here in the city of Buffalo. We have a serious situation, and as a result of our failure to educate, we also have a high rate of incarceration, drug use, self-esteem issues, what have you. It doesn't have to be this way. We need to focus on this issue.
Well, Mike, I hear what you're saying, but first of all, what is your affiliation, your party affiliation?
So I'm a independence. I will be on the independence line, Republican line, and the conservative line for the election.
Okay, now historically, Republicans haven't necessarily been for the urban community or the minority community. Where does your passion come from?
So I would like to challenge what you just said. We haven't been. Now, I recognize, I really view there's an establishment party out there, whether Democrat or Republican. I think that both parties have failed what's happening in the inner city. Didn't just start happening the last 10 years. It's been happening multi-generational. Neither party is doing anything to correct the over 300 people shot and killed in Chicago. Well, guess what? Buffalo? Divide our population by Chicago's population, we're right there too. We're one of the more violent cities. Our inner city's failing us. It's being controlled by Democrats, so they're not being successful in addressing this issue either. Both parties are ineffectual. Regardless of the direction in which it's being managed or attempting to fix the issues, both parties are failing.
You know, I gotta agree with you. And that's why I was very excited after I spoke with you, you know, about your agenda and your mindset and where you're coming from, because we're in a situation now where it goes beyond party lines. It goes beyond black and white. It goes beyond urban and suburban. Mm-hmm. You know, it goes beyond that. This is about the people. It is about the people. And all the time I try to get people to understand that we have to, as a black man, we have to stop voting for people because they look like us. We have to stop voting for people just because they're the color of us. We have to stop voting for people just because they're in the same party as us. We need to start voting for people who are going to get the job done, who have compassion for people and the problems going on in our city.
So this is where I have a problem with our current congressperson, Brian Higgins. He doesn't talk about these issues. It's almost like a codependent family with a drunk father. If you don't talk about dad being a drunk, everyone, you know, you're enabling the problem. Brian Higgins doesn't talk about us being the third most impoverished city in the United States. He doesn't talk about our 280% violent crime rate above New York City. 280% above New York City. He doesn't talk about our failure, total failure of our education system. 20% graduation rate for black males. Doesn't talk about
Horrible.
it. In fact, he's talked about school failure only twice this year. He's on YouTube once and he's on the Henny show or interview show once. Both times he's talking about Afghanistan, the inability to, the failure of their education program and the inability to reconstitute a viable government. Well, in my opinion, we have the same problem here. We have the same graduation rate and we have the same government breakdown. And Brian Higgins on the federal level has failed to properly represent and resolve this. He wouldn't do it by himself, but there's a huge federal component to this and it's been totally neglected.
Well, he talks a lot about the waterfront.
Oh, he is Mr. Waterfront. He wants to build Higgins City on the water.
Higgins City on the
water.
water.
That's a legacy, that's his purpose. And I think when you're talking about making the selection when you're in the voter booth, I really think people got to say, okay, what's the person's purpose? What is the passion that really drives them? Is it self-interest? Is it really something related to the constituents? Is it driven by special interests? I really think that's what the voters should be looking at. You know, right now, low budget, grassroots, constituents based, lots of support in the city, lots of support in the suburbs. That's my campaign right now. Brian Higgins, you know, he's a champion for the waterfront. And, you know, one of his biggest donors is the one that's doing a lot of the construction there. Same company that's doing the splash pad at Martin Luther King Park. That's totally, and silence. Once again, so
isn't that the same company that's now being sued in Lewiston
for
over 5 years of not completing that job?
Absolutely, yes.
And those are the same people that they're going to have on the waterfront doing that contract?
Same company.
The same people who haven't completed Martin Luther King?
Brian Higgins and Kennedy are the two that introduced those contractors in a big show over on the waterfront. And that's one of Brian Higgins' top donors, one of his biggest donors. I think it's his #1, it's been reported. He is silent on the splash pad, the Martin Luther King splash pad. Now, I know the kids don't donate to his campaign. I know this company does. But those kids are his constituents. He needs to represent those children as well as the adults that are impacted by the failure of this company, and he silenced.
Mr. Madigan.
Money buys silence. That's what I conclude there.
So you're telling this audience that one of his biggest sponsors, his biggest contributors, is the company that's failing to complete in a timely manner the Martin Luther King Splash Park right now.
So I'll take you a step further. The courthouse was finished on time.
Sure was.
You know what? And let's face it, that courthouse, we've now built a second courthouse.
For what?
What is the priority? So and that was clearly, Brian was very passionate. I'm sure the contributor, I mean the contractor for that, the donor or contractor, whatever you want to call it for Brian, I'm sure that, you know, there was a lot of benefits there for him. But also, that courthouse is built on the backs of our failing education system. It's built on and it's an investment in the failure of our future. Is that really what we want to be investing our time and money in? The courthouse so that we can lock up all the kids that we failed to educate? You know, the other people that we're going to be locking up, the taxpayers that are pissed off about the Martin Luther King Park, you know, that are furious with Brian's donors, you know, that's just, you know.
Mike, if I may call you Mike.
Yes, absolutely.
Before we go any further, could you please explain to the audience out there
Sure.
what a congressman does? Specifically, what is the job of Brian Higgins as a congressman?
Number one, he needs to represent his constituents. That's not the special interests.
Who are his constituents?
The people, which means whether it's an infant, whether it's a 10-year-old kid in our public school system, or whether it's an adult that's unable to get a job right now. Right now, Brian Higgins consistently represents only one set of people, in my opinion. It's his donors. He doesn't provide access in an open forum. He won't sit in front of you here. I challenge Brian Higgins to sit here and talk to you. You will not see him submit himself to any questioning like this. He's one of the few congressmen that does not hold town hall meetings and answer questions because, you know, he reports to the people. He does not hold any town hall meetings. He holds Congress on your corner, which might lead you to believe that he's going to be present. He's below that. He's above that. His staff will go to the Congress on your corner. I will be, on a regular basis, I will be in front of my constituents and I will ask, you know, I need to be held, if I'm a congressperson, I will be held accountable.
Yes.
And I will make sure that my constituents hold me accountable. Brian Higgins, if you're talking a big donor, he'll be in front of that donor like that answering questions. If you're talking about his constituents, let's say they're concerned about Martin Luther King Park and the splash pad failure to be completed on time before Juneteenth, you know, it's his donors that take priority over his constituents.
Well, I got to say, I got to admit that I do believe you because a couple years back, in 2010, I was down at Congressman Higgins' office several times trying to have a one-on-one facial with him about some very important situations going on in my personal life. And I never was able to address him directly.
Correct.
Always through one of his surrogates. He never would just give me a one-on-one and give me 5 minutes of a time, which really discouraged me.
Right.
And although some things were done theoretically with his name behind it, my problems have still not been addressed to this time.
Right.
Now, that's not the reason why I have you on here now.
Right.
And we're having this conversation, but it just brings to mind that fact that you're right. He wouldn't deal with me either.
So
and I am a constituent.
So your question was, what do you do when you're in Congress?
Yes.
You represent the people that are in your district. There's, I think it's 770,000 people. It's a big district. There's a lot of issues. There's limited funds. There's limited funds to go around to address the critical issues. And right now, with our current deficit situation, there's even more limit to that. We need to focus on A items. There's always B items and C items. If you were to become prosperous, which the city can become prosperous, it's just not being permitted to do that because of the failure to educate the kids. Our failure to educate is directly responsible for our 280% crime rate above New York City, and it's also directly, you can draw a bright line right to our poverty limit, or poverty level, which drives a huge poverty industry, which actually incentivizes it not being fixed. We need to fix and deconstruct that poverty industry.
Okay, well, let's focus on education for a minute.
And that's how you do it. Education is how you, education abolishes, it's on my cards, and that's what I'm passionate about. Education abolishes oppression. Right now, that's the problem in New York State, or New York State as a whole, throughout the U.S. in inner city, and it is the civil rights issue, federal issue, issue that our congressmen should be focused on, not the luxury issues of getting out into park space over on the waterfront.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're talking about life, you know, maybe it sounds dramatic, life and death. Kids are being shot almost daily around here.
That's right.
And,
That's right.
And
but you never see Brian Higgins around here on these streets.
Drug rate, you know, there's so many issues that come right directly out of our failure to educate, and that's what we need to focus on.
You said that we only have a 20% graduation rate of our black male youth in this city, correct?
Yes.
Well, that's horrifying.
Yeah, I don't know the exact number, but it's at 20 or less. New York State as a whole, we're at 25%. The next worst state, so New York State is the worst in the entire United States. Buffalo is the worst in New York State. We have 28 schools that are in the bottom 5% for the state, which is the worst state for public education in the United States. The next worst state is Florida. We're at 25% as a state, which includes the suburbs, for graduation rate for black males. And Florida is the next worst at 37%. Most of them are way statistically significantly above that.
But we steady build more prisons and more jails and more courthouses.
Hey, you know, and you know what? Maybe our current congressman views that as a jobs program, because let's face it. And actually, in terms of our prisons, in terms of our prisons, we're actually starting to view them as a commodity. We're actually starting to use them to produce uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
Goods and that's an incentive. Let's say, okay, suddenly we have a capacity problem. Oh, we need more prisoners.
Yeah, that's an incentive to convict.
Yeah, absolutely.
It certainly is.
That to me sounds like slavery, you know?
It absolutely does. Well, we've been talking about that for years.
And I would like to say, well, never mind, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, you know, I had a gentleman on a few weeks back, Carl Palladino. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Absolutely.
And Carl Palladino came on, and he was talking about the education and the school system. He was very passionate about it.
Absolutely.
Carl Palladino told me that the Buffalo public school system gets $990 million
right.
a year.
$1 billion.
Almost $1 billion.
Right.
He told me that for every child in here, they spend about $25,000.
Right.
Later on, I found out that number was even higher, so he was telling the truth. It was $27,000 average per student. Mm-hmm. Well, that's more than college tuition.
Right.
So
it's not a money problem.
Why aren't we producing?
Some of our best schools around, Nichols, for instance, thousands of dollars less per student, and greatly successful. I mean, there's a waiting line for Nichols. So it's not a money problem, it's a structural problem for our school system. Our system is really, it's segregated. That's the sad reality. Politically, so me saying this, it's politically probably not a good thing, but you know, I'm going to just speak the truth.
I appreciate that.
And you know, take the consequence at the other end, because someone needs to talk about this. You got to not talk about it. So we're taking the testing out, putting into City Honors. City Honors, one of the top 5 schools in the entire United States, sitting right next to some of the worst schools in the entire United States. I mean, the worst and the best. And what have we done? We've concentrated the lower performing students. We set an expectation of low performance, and expectations does drive results. That's well documented, proven time and again. But we've also concentrated, in any population, there's a certain number of kids that are going to be troublemakers. That's reality. That's human nature.
Certainly.
But they're not over in City Honors, I'll tell you right now. Those troublemakers aren't there because they won't last very long, because they'll be put back over in the other schools. And we've concentrated the troublemakers, the lower performing students as well. And that sets up the teachers to have an extremely tough time to be successful. If we had a normal population distribution and a normal number of disruptive students, it's more likely that the higher the percent of disruptive students, the higher likelihood that you're not going to be successful in teaching. So that's one of the problems. And structurally, our whole society here in Buffalo, we used to have truant officers. do we not have truant office? Oh, we have to cut costs.
No question.
You know, and similarly, you know, even the discipline in the schools, there's fear. You know, we used to have appropriate discipline and control of our students, but it's really run away. And I'm going to say it. There's a lot of, you know, I'm going to say liberal, politically correct approaches to doing things that are the consequence, the unintended consequence. Although I think I question that, is contributing to the failure.
Do you believe that schools in Buffalo, by taking out corporal punishment in our schools, it has contributed to the failure of our students?
I believe that's
I do
true.
too. We're on one accord.
Yep.
Because, I mean, even the Bible says, spare the rod, spoil the child.
Absolutely.
What don't people get about that?
Right. Yep.
What don't people get about that?
And you know, that goes back to the house too. Some level of corporate punishment, and you know, in Texas, I think it's called the 2-slap rule or something like that. And I'm not kidding, it's really called that. You know, there's a certain level of discipline, and right now, parents are fearful. You know, they're literally afraid to appropriately manage their kids. And I want to be clear, there's definitely accountability in terms of the parents. So my belief is, as a community leader, I'm going to say something that's maybe politically incorrect. The luxury of getting out to parks out on the waterfront probably won't be one of my priorities. Number one, it's mainly a state issue. It's not a federal issue. Mm-hmm. Actually, it's 99.9% not a federal issue. Civil rights issues, that's right at the top of a federal. I mean, if I were to prioritize federal issues, if there's a civil rights issue going on, that's going to be at the top of my list, and that's what we have right now.
So you as a congressman, when a civil rights issue comes up, you are the advocate for the person that's been abused, for the person whose civil rights have been violated. Is that what you're...
I wouldn't say the person. I'm going to say if we see a problem, and there is a problem countrywide, it is the civil rights issue of our time. Our public schools are failing us. Our employment laws are failing us as well. We have a law referred to.
Well, let's hold on until we get to that.
Sure.
Okay. I want to stick on education
school,
for a minute.
that is the civil rights issue of our time.
You've told us the problems with education and the correlation of our young black males incarcerated, killing each other and whatever.
Right.
Okay, now let's talk about some solutions to the education situation. What are some of the solutions that you would bring and advocate for if you got the position of the congressman?
So now, as a federal leader, I mean, Buffalo's going from 3 congressional representatives to 1. So really, the fact that I've only been mentioned once in the last 4 months by the Buffalo News, you know, they're denying people a choice. They are denying people an education. And let's face it, there were 3 congressmen leading what has been a failed district. You know, we've lost 2 of our representatives. 2/3 of your federal dollars you had access to, gone because of loss of population. 34,000 people in this region gone. They fled the area because of high crime rate, the poverty level, the lack of jobs. I mean, that's why people are fleeing this area. Our kids do not stay home anymore. They have to leave to find a job. And that's all by itself a problem.
Okay, so more answers to the education situation?
So my solutions would be, you know, multifaceted. On the federal level, vouchers for parents, whether it's homeschooling, private or charter school. We need to investigate, I think. We need to understand, how is it that we're paying $26,900 per student and we're failing so miserably, which means we need to investigate, you know, not just here, Chicago, name the city where we're failing, but, you know, I think the poster child is the Buffalo public school system because it is the worst in the country. So I think this is probably a good model to look at and understand, you know, structurally the way it's segregated, which I think probably is a civil rights issue all by itself, but then the failure and the lack of equality. And let me just talk about the lack of equality. Right now, BOCES, the Erie 1 BOCES, which is Erie County, because that's where we are in Buffalo, it's denied, it's banned by New York State education law from participating in the Buffalo school system, Buffalo School District. It's only 1 of 5 population centers or districts, which is Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, Yonkers, and New York City, which so happen to be the 5 minority biggest concentrated areas. Out of 697 school districts, there's 5 that are banned from participating in BOCES. every school district in the entire region, you know, however many there are, I can only guess, let's say 20 within within 100 miles at least. There's a big donut hole. I mean, it's the Buffalo district or school district, which those vocational study programs that BOCES provides, that would retain a lot of the children that are currently dropping out between 9th and 10th grade, which in some of the school districts is 50%. 50% of the 9th to 10th graders dropping out of school.
Wow, it's incredible.
And so the vocational study programs, which are your trades, which means, you know, maybe they don't intend to go to college. Not every child wants to go to college, but those programs, plumber, auto mechanic, it's really, BOCES is highly effective at administering those programs, and New York State education law bans them. So that is an unequal education opportunity for the city of Buffalo relative to all surrounding areas, including Niagara Falls, which has a good program.
Okay, let's talk about education incentives.
Sure.
I've been a strong advocate of school stipends for attendance and performance of the students. I believe that once a student crosses that 9th grade barrier and they're in the 9th grade to the 12th grade, well, going to school is just like going to jobs because it's preparing them for jobs. So why not give them a cash stipend to keep them motivated to come and perform? How do you feel about cash stipends?
You know, and you know, my major is communication and principles of persuasion and what have you. There's pros and cons to that. Sometimes if you pay a child to read a book, it can be counterproductive because then in order to read the next book, you might have to pay them. So I would really want to look at that and look at the pros and cons. I think more so I'm not saying no, but I would challenge that we need to really better understand that. But I think there's a lot of other lower hanging fruit here in Buffalo that structurally we're set up to fail right now.
The reason I bring that up is because I've talked to numerous kids, and I can tell one of the number one problems why they drop out is because of lack of funds, because they're hungry, because they don't have the right clothes to wear.
Right.
But you know what I mean? Because their pockets are empty because there's no food at home. And many of them had talked about, well, if I could get some type of cash from going to school, I'd go, I'd participate. But right now, I'm out here on the block trying to get my money.
See, I think, so I'm going to just kind of twist that a little further. You know, right now when we have some schools with graduation rates of less than 20%, I mean 15, et cetera, dropouts for the African male of 50% between 9th and 10th grade, in those schools there's very little teaching going on. And a child, or a young adult in this case, at, you know, between 9th and 10th grade, they've reached an age where they can make a choice. If very little teaching is going on, they're not going to sit around there twiddling their thumbs. And or I would almost contend it's a health and safety issue right now. They're going in, there's very little teaching going on, there's bullying, there's violence, they're being exposed to a very unhealthy situation. If the graduation rate is way below 50% and below 25%, it's a health and safety issue. I almost would say that, you know, geez, if I'm a parent in that circumstance, I'm probably going to homeschool and my child probably won't have a good attendance
So the environment
record.
is a big issue.
Right.
Okay, listen everybody, as you see, this is very informative. The program is very informative. What's happening here now is we're out of time right now for this segment, but we're going to be coming right back with Mike Madigan so we can finish elaborating on his agenda, on his quest to become the next congressman for Buffalo, for the surrounding areas. And I would tell you this is very important. You pay attention to this show. You pay attention, you pay attention, you pay attention. This is Nate Boyd from People Empowerment saying that we'll talk again very, very soon. Okay, so.